One of the strangest and hardest parts of living with a chronic mental illness is that you can't trust every thought or feeling that comes into your mind. Now, maybe everybody lives with that to some degree, but when you know that your brain has the ability to feel crushing despair or incredible fear or anxiety or virtually uncontrollable anger, when literally nothing is wrong, when nothing has changed outside of you, and the only reason you're feeling what you're feeling in the moment is because internally something about the function of your neurotransmitters has shifted, it becomes very difficult to believe anything you feel and to trust your own feelings. This is something I struggled with a lot early on in life, especially when depression started to hit me really hard early in adolescence. And I would just have these random days, weeks, months where I just felt like my life was terrible and I hated everything in it. And I didn't realize that this was a mental health symptom. I didn't realize that something was wrong internally, because I think our default assumption when we feel that way is that something is wrong externally. And it makes us think that there must be something we need to change or we need to fix. And so when I became depressed and didn't enjoy being with my friends anymore, I thought that meant I didn't like my friends anymore. And I stopped hanging out with those people. When I was so depressed that I didn't even want to see my family, which was at age like 13, I thought this must mean I've outgrown my family. This must be that adolescent rebellion that I was told to expect. This must be the time I'm supposed to separate from them and stop going on family trips and stop doing fun things with them. And I took my feelings and impulses and thoughts that came from my depressive episodes as guidance for life. And I listened to them and I aligned with them, and I completely screwed up my life as a result of that in ways that at age 41, I am to some degree still recovering and building back from things that happened when I was 13 years old. If you are somebody living with a chronic mental illness, it's a tricky thing to do, but you have to know that not everything that comes into your mind is a winner. Not every feeling deserves to be acted upon. Not every thought is an accurate reflection of reality. You're going to have times when you think people are mad at you, or you think you're doing a terrible job, or you think you have no future, and there is no basis in reality for it whatsoever. It's just your brain, it's just your depression messing with you and playing tricks on you. Not that it does it on purpose, it's not like a malicious entity, it just is dysfunction. Your brain has periods of dysfunction. And when you realize you're in one of those periods of dysfunction, the best thing to do is to not take the content of your mind super seriously. I know that that is easier said than done. And I know that recognizing that you're in a depressive episode and that your emotions are out of whack and that your thoughts are being blown out of proportion because you're in an episode doesn't stop them from happening. It doesn't take away the feeling. It doesn't take away the baseless sorrow and despair that comes from absolutely nothing or some little thing being wrong. But it at least helps you contextualize it. And it at least helps you not make really dangerous, rash decisions based on intangible and temporary emotional states. Now, this is going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but this is a complicated matter. The flip side to that is even if you are living with a chronic mental illness that impacts your emotions, not every emotion that you experience is pathological. Just because you have depression, that doesn't mean that every time you feel depressed, it's because nothing is wrong and your brain is just overreacting. Sometimes something is wrong. Just because you have anxiety doesn't mean that every single time you're stressed out about something, your brain is blowing it out of proportion. Sometimes things are really screwed up. Just because you have PTSD doesn't mean that every time you feel triggered by a person, that that person is actually safe and harmless, and it's just your trauma causing you to appraise them as sketchy or dangerous. Sometimes they are. Sometimes you're not wrong. So much of learning to live with a chronic mental illness is being able to learn this discernment. And it's hard. I'm still at age 41. I still have moments where I'm like, am I actually sad because something is wrong? Or am I just having a random mood swing because I have a chronic cyclical mood disorder? I don't have a 100% reliable way to discern between these two things. But I do have a way that works most of the time for me. And that is, do I immediately know why I feel this way? Because if you're anything like me, what happens for me when I feel depressed is my brain then is like, well, why? And it basically just gives me a bullet point list of everything that's not super awesome in my life right now. And I can always find something to justify it because my life is not perfect and my life never will be perfect, nor will yours. So the question isn't, can you find a reason why you might be depressed? Because of course you can. You always will be able to find the reason. The question is, was that reason already in the forefront of your mind before this emotion took place? Because if something is really, really wrong in like a tangible, it needs to be fixed kind of way, you really shouldn't have to search for it. You shouldn't have to like explore the recesses of your mind to try to figure out why you're feeling that way. If it has a real external cause, that should be on your mind already. If you have to search for the reason that you feel the way you feel, then the feeling is probably a symptom. And whatever reason you can come up with is probably just a proxy and not the real reason. And if that's your conclusion, as it often is for me, take the feeling seriously to the extent that you're experiencing a symptom that needs to be addressed, but do not take the feeling seriously to the extent where you perceive it as guidance, that I need to change something in my life because I feel this way. I need to fix this problem. Because you can't fix depression by just rearranging your life. It doesn't work that way. Something else I learned very early on in life, although I didn't probably have the vocabulary to define it this way until recently, is that I need to set and maintain a budget for sadness. I become overwhelmed very easily by tragedy and by despair, and by news and by media. My parents figured out really early on, after a few, we'll say, problematic experiences at movie theaters, my budget for adversity, even fictionally, is minimal. And I assume that this is just because of my brain, again, that my brain, as many people's brains with depression are, it's not just that we're not weak, we're not pathetic, we're not stupid. In fact, a lot of research suggests that it is the opposite, and that many people with depression have above average awareness of the state of the world. And the state of the world, if you fully just kind of assess it for what it is, I think is objectively a fairly depressing thing. People with depression are usually high empathy. People with depression are usually high IQ. We know what's going on. We see things pretty clearly. We care about things a lot. And we realize, like, in many ways, this is kind of a raw deal. And making the best out of life and making a life that is enjoyable more often than not is a hard thing to do and is not just the default natural human state. It requires a lot of effort and, frankly, a lot of strategy. A big part of that strategy for me is being super cautious about what I expose myself to. I kind of cut myself off on the movie theater story, I know, but we would watch just like, now keep in mind I'm a 90s kid. 90s Disney was different, right? If you were around then, 90s Disney, really heavy on the tragedy and the grief and the trauma for whatever reason. Like, I was just talking with someone the other day about Land Before Time, where Littlefoot thinks that he sees his mom's reflection in the water. Like, I would have mental breakdowns over stuff like that when I was a kid. Like, every other kid in the movie theater would be like, oh, this is cool. I'm just like sobbing. And my parents realized, like, they had to kind of protect me from media. Thankfully, they were able to pick up on that. But now that's my job. And I take this very seriously. So when I hear about, movies or video games or books or whatever, where people are like, oh, you're going to be so sad when this is over. You're going to feel so bad for the characters. I'm like, nope, that's not for me then. That's not for me. I get my fill of that just from existing. Like, I do. I don't need extra sadness. I don't need extra drama. In fact, I can't afford it. I literally can't afford it, and it will shut me down. I can be so overwhelmed by general sadness about the state of the world that I am non-functional, that I am disabled. And I know this because it has happened over and over and over again. It's not that I just stick my head in the sand and don't pay attention to the world. It's that through pretty significant trial and error, I have learned where my line is, and I know when I'm close to crossing that line, and I know when to pull back. Because I am no good to anybody if I'm shut down by my own thoughts and feelings. Depression often makes us feel like we have no purpose in life, no meaning in life. Like when I get in an episode, all the things that I normally find fun or rewarding, it's like, well, for what? Why? Why bother working out? What's that going to do? Like extend my life? Do I even care about that? Make me look better? Who cares? Like that doesn't, none of this stuff matters. That's how I think when I'm depressed. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. I don't know. I don't see behind the veil of the world, right? But meaning is a tricky thing. And I'm going to do the annoying therapist thing here. And I'm going to throw a question back at you. If you feel like life has no meaning, or like your existence has no meaning when you're depressed, or maybe even when you're not depressed, but you probably feel it more strongly when you are depressed, like so much so that it doesn't feel worth doing anything. It doesn't feel worth taking care of yourself, going to work, seeing people. How do you define meaning? Because if you can't define meaning, you can't know if you have it or not. If you're going to say, I either have this thing or don't have this thing, you got to be able to say what this thing is, right? I've heard people generally define meaning broadly speaking, in two ways. Some people say that meaning is a status. Like meaning is basically having things in life that matter or are important. If we go by that definition, then unless something has actually changed about your life when you're in a depressive episode, you haven't lost meaning. What you've lost is your connection to the feeling of meaning. But if the meaning comes from external factors in your life, whether it's your career, your family, whatever, that's still there, you just can't connect with it, you just can't feel it, then you haven't lost meaning. You have lost your connection with meaning. And it will come back. I don't know how long it will take, but it will come back. And basically, your sense of your life being meaningless in that explanation is an illusion. It's a trick, it's not real, and it's just something you need to tough out. If you say that is meaning is your felt sense, your subjective experience of the things you do mattering, then meaning is not a status, meaning is an emotion. And you can't possess an emotion. Because by definition, the way our brains work, every emotional experience is acute. It's temporary. Emotions, all of them, pleasant and unpleasant, are created by neurotransmitter functions in your brain. Your neurons, your brain cells, they send chemical signals to other neurons or brain cells, which creates a feeling. And then eventually they engage in a process called reuptake, where they take the electrical impulses back and the transmission stops sending. Every emotional experience is temporary. So if you define meaning by just feeling something you feel like you have or not, then it's like saying, I have happiness. Happiness isn't a status. You don't have it or not have it. You experience it during certain conditions or certain periods of time in your life. And then there's also times when you don't experience it. And it's just an experience, not a thing that you can have. So if you get crippled, like I have from time to time, by this sense of having no meaning or nothing mattering when you feel depressed, define it. Figure out which one of those it is, and then it's either something you still have or something you never had in the first place. And there's really no other explanation to it. I think it's really important to remember that managing a chronic mental health condition is a full-time job, and it deserves to be taken just as seriously as any other chronic health condition. This is very frustrating, I know, and it's hard to hear, but if you don't know this, don't accept it, and don't organize your life around it, you're going to hit a brick wall over and over and over again. If you have a chronic mental health condition or multiple chronic mental health conditions, that's your point of constraint. Like that is the thing that is most likely to screw up your life or possibly even prematurely end your life, which means as far as your allocation of time, energy, and attention, managing your mental health condition is what should get probably the bulk of that. It should not get the leftovers. If you are like, okay, I got to go to work, I got to take care of my family, I got to take care of my house, here's all my obligations, and whatever's left over at the end of all that, that's what I'll give to me to try to make sure I stay okay. You're going to crash and burn over and over and over again because your order of operations is inverted. Your brain functioning is foundational to everything else you want to do in life. You can't go to work if your brain doesn't work. You can't go to school if your brain doesn't work. You can't have meaningful relationships if your brain doesn't work. You can't do anything if your brain doesn't work. And if you have severe depression, or at least depression that at times reaches that severe level, you don't do anything when it gets that bad. So what in your life could possibly be more sustaining and more fundamental than trying to prevent it from getting to that state? That needs to be one of, if not your top priority every day. And the rest of your life needs to get the leftovers. Not because you're the most important person on earth, because you're not, but because without maintaining your mental health, everything else will fall apart. Now, in terms of how to maintain your mental health, I find it really important to remember that mental health is brain health. I don't know why this gets skipped over so often, but you need to take care of your brain. Like physiologically, you need to take care of your brain. And that basically comes down to four things. Your brain needs rest, which primarily comes from sleep. You got to get ideally about 8 hours of high quality sleep a night at as close to the same time as possible every night. It also needs rest, as in you can't just sleep 8 hours and then work 16 hours a day and think that's good. You need breaks. And those breaks need to be high quality. They need to be things that actually take your mind off work and refresh your brain, but aren't so stimulating that you don't want to get back to work eventually. Your brain needs caloric energy. And that comes from regular intake of food, ideally high quality food, but I'm not going to nitpick too much on that because I know how hard diet is. Your brain needs blood and oxygen, which comes from physical activity and moving your body. And your brain needs neurological consistency. And that comes from, if you have any prescription psychiatric medications that you're on, being really consistent with taking them. It also comes from minimizing any other psychoactive substances that you put into your body, including things like caffeine, alcohol, marijuana. All of these things affect your brain functioning. And if you acutely have them in your system and then don't have them in your system, it's basically just a roller coaster that you ride all day long. And no, that's not me saying you should be drinking all day long. It's me saying ideally, if you have depression or anxiety or something along those lines, you barely ever drink. Like the ideal amount is probably 0. I'm not the boss of your life. I'm not going to try to enforce that on you. I personally don't drink. And I've never had a problem with alcohol. Like it hasn't been a health issue or a social issue. I've just found that my brain works better when I just simplify that and say, nope, I'm just not going to do that. You got to negotiate your own relationship with these things, but you can't just neglect your brain. You can't just stay up super late, eat like crap, be sedentary, put whatever you want in your body, and then think, I'm going to have good mental health. No, you're not. And even if you're in therapy, even if you're on psych meds, it's not going to counteract the neglect you're putting yourself through every day. So remember that mental health is brain health. Last thing for today, I know this has maybe sounded a little bit harsh or judgmental. This is mostly just me talking to me. This is me giving advice to me, and sometimes I'm annoyed with myself. So if it sounds like I'm annoyed with you, please know that I'm not. And that's why I want to say this last, which is shaming yourself actually sets you up for failure. Because for most of us, we do things that end up hurting us in the long run, right? Whether that's using substances or spending too much money or just engaging in risky behaviors, doing things that we know are going to have high consequences for us down the road. We usually do those things because in the moment we feel so awful that we don't care about what happens next. We don't care how we're going to feel in 7 days if we don't even know if we're going to be here in 7 days. But then afterwards, when we're dealing with the aftermath of our decisions, we think that if we just feel terrible enough about the things we did, we'll stop doing it. Like by punishing ourselves, that we can just cut off the behavior. Not only does this typically not work, it usually ends up being counterproductive, because the more you shame yourself, the worse you feel, and the worse you feel, the higher risk you are. Not the lower, the higher risk you are at of using these really intense coping mechanisms because your current distress level is so overwhelming. This one might be a little more philosophical too, but big picture wise, when you engage in patterns of self-shame, the one person on earth who knows your whole story, who has the ability to really understand why things happen the way they did. The one person who has enough data on you to say, yes, I know that thing you did really screwed things up for you. And yeah, ideally you wouldn't have done it. Also, I know what you were going through at that time, and I can understand why you made that decision then. Let's try not to do it again, because it did really screw things up. But let's not just guilt trip you nonstop about what's already happened, because you have no agency over history. When that person, which is you, by the way, tells you that they're just one more person who doesn't get it, and they're just one more person who thinks you're a screw up and a failure, then you feel completely alone in this world. And there are few things more depressing than feeling like nobody gets it, even the person who has seen all of it play out. So if no one else can be an ally to you in understanding what you've been through, please make sure that you can be that person. Don't align with the screwed up, broken, judgmental world. Don't be just one more person who piles on and who doesn't get it. Don't act like you don't know your own backstory, and use what you know about yourself to understand yourself and have empathy for yourself and validate yourself, because that's what people actually need to change. If that wasn't how it worked, then therapy would just be shaming people. It would just be people coming in and me telling them, basically giving them a list like, here's everything you're doing wrong, here's how it's screwing up your life, now go change it. That's not what therapy is, because that doesn't work. And it won't work any better if you do it to yourself than if I did it to you.